G'day, welcome to another episode of Toxic Revisited. Today I'm filming at Hideaway Bay. They seem to have taken all the salmon cages away. No, it's not that Hideaway Bay, it's actually Hideaway Bay in North Queensland. And it's a little bit chilly today. One of the topics that Richard Flanagan and the other anti-salmon farming activists constantly harp on about is the lack of independent science in terms of investigating and studying aquaculture. By implication that if you work for an institution, you must therefore be not independent and at the worst, in the pay of industry. So this episode is actually going to examine that concept of independent science and find out just how independent it actually is. You'll remember that there was the independent Professor Graham Edgar, who, though quoted in a comment but not cited in any of his papers, as opposed to the not independent, in fact the industry-bought Professor Katrina McLeod, who has written far more papers but is in the pocket of industry, one being independent and the other one being totally bought. Well, let's examine that concept of independence a little bit further, because they both worked for IMAS. In last week's video on the water wars, we looked at the article from the Mercury where scientists call for more vigilant testing to discover effects of bacteria on consumers. So, who are the scientists mentioned in this article? Well, first up, we have our friends Dr. Christine Kokenauer and Dr. Lisa Ann Gershwin. But there's a couple of other scientists also mentioned in the article. There is Professor Tony Cook from the UTAS Menzies Centre, and there's also an aquatic ecologist, Chris Bobby, also mentioned. And apparently Chris Bobby used to be an ecologist for the Department of Primary Industries, Water and Environment. So if Chris Bobby represented De Pipwe and Tony Cook represented UTAS, what does Christine and Lisa Ann represent? Well, they're both members of an organisation called the Tasmanian Independent Science Council. So what is the Tasmanian Independent Science Council and TISC? Well, it's pretty important first that you don't confuse the TSIC with the TSIC. I think I've just confused them. Don't confuse the Tasmanian Independent Science Council with the Tasmanian Seafood Industry Council. But I digress. So the Tasmanian Independent Science Council, so what does it do? It says that it has a number of projects, which we'll look in a sec. Firstly, let's have a look at the people who are involved in it. And we've got Professor Jamie Kirkpatrick from UTAS, Christine Kokenauer, independent, Professor John Church from the Climate Change Research Centre of the University of New South Wales, Lisa Ann Gershwin, Professor Ben Richardson from UTAS, Eloise Carr from the Australia Institute, Eric Waller from BirdLife Tasmania, Dr. Jennifer Sanger, Dr. Edward Butler, Dr. Melinda McHenry, Dr. Tony Koslow from the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, and others as well. So we've got a mixture there. We've got some people who are working for academic organisations and some people who are unaffiliated. So let's examine now what the Tasmanian Independent Science Council does. It's got three main projects: forests and fire, fresh water, including irrigation, hydropower, aquaculture, mining and other developments, and oceans, including pressure from climate change, fishing and aquaculture operations, agriculture runoff, urban development and population growth. So that's their three projects. But why don't we actually have a look at where their priorities actually lie? Because in their media releases, of the 17 media releases listed on their website, 10 of the 17 are about the Tasmanian aquaculture industry. All 10 of them criticising the Tasmanian aquaculture industry. Okay, so that's the Tasmanian Independent Science Council. So what is an independent scientist? Well, the best answer I could actually find is actually from Cora in response to a question. Can you give an example of independent science? And the answer is, independent science is, at best, a concept. The hope that careful scientific work and the findings of that work will be done without interference from those with political interests in the implication of scientific findings. This is an aspiration that can be approached but never attained, an asymptotic goal. So in essence, it would seem to imply that without any interference means someone who is not affiliated with any organisation. And if we look back again to those people who are members of the Tasmanian Independent Science Council, we see that some of them are actually working for institutions. So it's still a little bit confusing. But what I'm suggesting is that instead of the term independent science, what the Tasmanian Independent Science Council actually is normative science. Normative science is the type of information that's developed, presented, or interpreted based on an assumed, usually unstated preference for a particular outcome, policy, or class of policies or outcomes. So, what particular outcome do you think the Tasmanian Independent Science Council is looking for? Well, in the last week, Neighbours of Fish Farms announced that more than 80 groups worldwide demand farm salmon accreditations stop greenwashing Maugean skate extinction. And we'll cover off the Maugean skate in a later episode. And the letter was sent from an organisation called Sea Choice to both Global Gap and to the Best Aquaculture Practices, calling for action to save the Maugean skate from aquaculture in Macquarie Harbour. And it was supported by 80 organisations. So here we have the Australia Institute, a known left-leaning research institute, the Animal Justice Party, the Bob Brown Foundation, a number of Canadian conservation groups, the David Suzuki Foundation, the author of the book Salmon Wars in Canada, hardly an organisation, but I digress, Environment Tasmania, and we know where they stand, and others, including our friend Gerald Castles from the Kilora Community Association, and Neighbours of Fish Farming, of course, Patagonia, known campaigners against salmon farming, Richard Flanagan, our friend, the Salmon Reform Alliance, Dr. Lisa Gershwin, the Salmon Reform Alliance, independent. And finally, past Sea Shepherd and some others. We've got our friends at TAMP. And then finally, we've got the Tasmanian Independent Science Council. Hardly independent, more like normative, wanting to get an assumed result that they prefer a particular outcome. So just to reiterate, normative science is a type of science that seeks to establish what ought to be rather than what is. It involves the application of value judgments, ethical principles, and subjective opinions to scientific research. In order to guard against normative science, there are several things that can be done. Firstly, use empirical methods, actually involve the collection of data through observation and experimentation. By doing this, scientists can focus on what is actually happening rather than what they believe should happen. So avoid those personal biases. Scientists should strive to avoid personal biases and opinions when conducting research. This can be achieved by being aware of their own biases and by using objective methods to collect and analyse data. And I think it's a little bit sad that in the case of Dr. Lisa Ann Gershwin, at least, whilst she is a member of the Salmon Reform Alliance, she can't say that she doesn't have biases when it comes to research that she proclaims is independent science. So whatever you do, don't become like this. So it seems that the Tasmanian Independent Science Council is perhaps not as independent as they would like to actually be. So I hope you've enjoyed this one. If you'd like to make any comments, please make the comments in the box below. Click like and click subscribe. I love getting views on these videos. So next time we'll be examining another aspect of the anti-salmon farming activism campaign. And in future episodes we'll be looking at the situation with the Maugean skate, the state of Long Bay, and stay tuned. I might even do some reaction videos to some of the recent videos put up by people such as Neighbours of Fish Farming and the mysterious Loco. Okay, thanks for watching. Catch you next time.